3 months after I finally walked away from my wealthy benefactor. I accidentally charged a box of ultra-thin condoms to his linked card. He sent a single, sharp text, "Is he better than me?" I ignored it. But that very night, when I returned to my hotel room on a business trip, a tall, imposing silhouette blocked my path. The man who was supposed to be 1,000 miles away. Marcus stood before me, looking windswept and lethal. In bed, he was merciless, driving me to the brink of madness. As I completely fell apart under him, he nipped at my earlobe, his voice low and dangerous. "Does he make you feel like this too?" I bit my lip, refusing to give him the satisfaction of an answer. Deep down, a foolish spark of joy flared at his jealousy. Until the storm subsided, the lust fading from his dark eyes. "Kelly, I'm getting married," he said, cold and detached. "This is the last time." I froze. The words felt like a bucket of ice water poured directly over my head. A deep, numbing chill seeped from my scalp down to my toes. Marcus rolled off the bed. A moment later, the sharp hiss of the shower echoed from the bathroom. I lay motionless on the tangled sheets. The harsh glare of the ceiling light made my eyes burn. I couldn't even remember how we had broken up 3 months ago. I only remembered the massive argument, the suffocating silence, and how I had impulsively thrown the word over in his face. He hadn't tried to soothe me. He hadn't even asked why. He had only looked at me with those cool, unreadable eyes and asked, "Are you sure about this?" I had nodded. Then, without another word, I packed my bags and took a long-term assignment in Chicago. I thought putting distance between us would help clear the lingering fog of heartbreak. I was wrong. For 3 months, I buried myself in endless work, trying to numb my own mind. Yet the moment the noise quieted down, his image would flood my thoughts, relentless and agonizing. So today, in a moment of pure, desperate madness at a convenience store, I swiped the joint credit card he had never deactivated. I bought a box of ultra-thin condoms. I wanted to see if he still cared. And he had come. He had caught a last-minute flight and driven through the night just to corner me in my hotel room. For a brief, naive moment, I believed we were going to make up. But after the passion cleared, he gave me a death sentence. He was getting married. When Marcus stepped out of the bathroom, he wore nothing but a low-slung towel around his waist. The lean, powerful muscles of his back and shoulders glistened under the dim yellow lights. He walked over to the bed, looking down at my motionless, curled-up form, and let out a soft frown. "Go wash up." I dragged myself up mechanically, my legs trembling so violently I could barely stand. Before I could fall, he stepped forward, scooped me up effortlessly in his arms, and carried me into the bathroom. It was just like the countless times before. He squeezed the body wash into his palm, rubbing his hands together until a thick lather formed. Then, he gently washed every inch of my skin. His touch was unbelievably tender, as if he were handling a piece of priceless, fragile porcelain. But my chest throbbed so hard I could barely breathe. He rinsed the soap away, shut off the water, and wrapped me in a plush towel. He didn't say a single word through it all. I stood there, swallowed by the fabric, watching him walk toward the door. "Congratulations." The word escaped my throat, raspy and hollow. Marcus paused. He turned his head slightly. His brow furrowed, as if trying to make sense of what he had just heard. His Adam's apple bobbed. "What did you say?" "Congratulations on your wedding." I forced my lips to curve into a fragile, pathetic smile. Marcus stared at me for several long seconds, his gaze dark and unreadable. "Get some sleep," he finally said. "I'll book another room next door." I was used to it. He was an incredibly light sleeper and hated sharing a bed through the night. Over the past few years, no matter how exhausted I was after we made love, I would always quietly gather my things and retreat to the guest bedroom. By the time I woke up the next morning, bright sunlight was already streaming through the window. I checked my phone, 9:30 a.m. There were 3 unread texts from my colleagues at the media network. "Kelly, where are you? Today's the day the executive director announces your promotion to lead producer." My heart leaped into my throat. I threw the phone onto the bed and rushed to get ready. Marcus had kept me up until 3 in the morning, and the ensuing insomnia had stolen another 2 hours of sleep. My entire body felt as though it had been run over by a semi-truck. I practically threw myself down the stairs and ran out of the lobby, only to stop dead in my tracks. A sleek black Maybach was idling right at the hotel entrance. The window rolled down smoothly, revealing Marcus in the driver's seat. He wore a charcoal gray dress shirt today, the sleeves rolled up carelessly to his forearms, exposing the firm, corded muscles of his wrists. He glanced at me. "Get in. I'll drive you." My instinct was to refuse. But he had already reached over and popped the passenger door open. After a second of agonizing hesitation, I climbed in. As I pulled the seatbelt across my chest, I deliberately kept my eyes glued to the side. Just drop me off near the broadcasting station. He didn't answer, simply shifting the car into drive. We rode in absolute silence. The only sound was the faint, steady hum of the air conditioner. I stared out the window, watching the city skyline blur past. As the familiar glass facade of the media building came into view, 2 traffic lights away, I spoke up. You can pull over right ahead. Marcus glanced at the road, his speed unchanging. We're not there yet. I don't need to be dropped off at the front doors, I said, biting my inner cheek. Today is my promotion day. I don't want people spreading rumors. He went quiet for a moment. Then, he smoothly brought the car to a halt by the curb. I pushed the door open and forced a polite, professional tone. Thank you, Mr. Mercer. Marcus frowned, his eyes darkening. I prefer it when you call me Marcus. You're getting married. It's not appropriate anymore. He didn't say another word. He simply checked his mirror, hit the gas, and left me in a cloud of exhaust. Fortunately, I wasn't late. The moment I walked into the station, several colleagues rushed over to congratulate me. Congrats, Kelly. You have to buy us coffee once the official announcement is made. I smiled warmly. I'll do you one better. Dinner is on me. The bullpen was lively and full of chatter until an assistant tapped my shoulder, telling me the executive director wanted to see me in his office. My chest swelled with excitement as I walked down the corridor. 5 years of relentless grinding in this cutthroat city. I was finally going to secure my place. But that short-lived thrill died the moment I stepped inside the director's office. Kelly, after a board review, we've decided that starting today, Serafina will take full charge of the late-night finance program. We'd like you to assist her with the transition. I stood frozen, my voice trembling. I've built that program from the ground up. Why is it suddenly being handed over to a newcomer who literally just joined the network? When I first took over late-night finance, it was the lowest-rated slot on the network. I had poured my soul into it, turning it into our flagship program. The director gave me a look of mild, patronizing pity. It's a decision from the top, Kelly. Seeing that I wasn't backing down, he decided to lay his cards on the table. Serafina brought a $12 million sponsorship package with her. That single deal covers our advertising targets for the next decade. If you were in my shoes, who would you choose? I leaned against the wall, my head spinning. The door clicked open behind me. A young woman dressed in an immaculate designer blazer stepped in. She was strikingly beautiful. She extended a manicured hand. Hi, I'm Serafina. I recognized her instantly. She was Marcus's childhood sweetheart, the girl who had just returned from Europe. His fiancée. All the scattered pieces in my head snapped into a cruel, perfect picture. It didn't take a genius to figure out who was behind that $12 million sponsorship. A bitter, quiet laugh escaped my throat. A couple of years ago, to secure a much smaller sponsorship for my show, I had practically begged Marcus for months just to get a $1 million deal. I had been profoundly grateful for it. Yet for Serafina, he had signed away $12 million without batting an eye. 12 million versus 1 million. I guess I truly was only worth a fraction of her in his eyes. Or maybe, I didn't even register on his scale at all. I went straight to Marcus's corporate headquarters. The receptionist recognized me and bypassed security, letting me straight into his private office. Marcus was sitting behind a massive mahogany desk, reviewing a stack of documents. He didn't even bother to look up. Something on your mind? My throat tightened, and I struggled to hold back the tears stinging my eyes. My voice cracked. There are dozens of slots at the network. Why did you have to let her take mine? Only then did Marcus raise his eyes. His gaze was entirely flat, devoid of any warmth. Because she wanted it. I stared at him, utterly paralyzed. Because she wanted it. With a single sentence, he justified throwing millions of dollars around to clear her path. Because she wanted it, he could effortlessly erase 5 years of my sweat, tears, and sleepless nights. He knew better than anyone what I had sacrificed for that show. During our peak season, I had worked myself to the point of physical collapse, ending up in the ICU with severe exhaustion. Tears spilled over my cheeks. Marcus, that's not fair. Kelly, he interrupted, his tone chillingly level. He set his pen down and leaned back in his leather chair. If I remember correctly, there were 3 candidates when you interviewed for that associate position years ago. The other 2 had Ivy League degrees and prestigious journalism backgrounds. Do you know why a state college graduate with 0 media experience like you got hired? While I stood there in stunned silence, he delivered the final blow. Because I made a $1 million donation to the network, on the sole condition that they hire you. Marcus stared at me as if I were a minor investment that had run its course. Kelly, there is no such thing as absolute fairness in this world. When you reach my level, then you can come talk to me about fairness. The blood drained from my face, leaving me cold and hollow. So that was the truth. On the day I received my offer letter, I had sat in my cramped, drafty apartment and cried tears of pure joy, believing my hard work had finally paid off. But it had all been a lie. I don't remember how I stumbled out of his office. His words felt like a physical assault, stripping away the last shreds of my dignity. I was utterly humiliated, with nowhere left to hide. When I first met Marcus, I was just a struggling, desperate intern. It was at a high-stakes networking dinner. After a few rounds of drinks, the atmosphere in the private dining room grew thick and predatory. The senior producer sitting next to me let his hands slide under the table, his fingers creeping toward my thigh. My body went rigid with terror. I tried to pull away, but I didn't dare make a scene and ruin the network's deal. Choking back my tears, I threw a desperate, pleading look at my team leader, the man who was supposed to be mentoring me. He blinked, registered what was happening, and promptly looked away. That was when Marcus, who had barely spoken a word all night, abruptly stood up. He walked over, grabbed my wrist, and pulled me out of my seat. Looking down at my tear-streaked face, he said, "Crying in front of these wolves won't save you, little girl." Then, he wrapped his large, warm hand over mine, picking up a heavy glass bottle from the table. A flash of pure, dangerous intent crossed his handsome features. With a sudden, violent motion, he forced my hand down, smashing the bottle squarely over the producer's head. The crash was deafening. The producer collapsed to the floor, groaning in pain. The room fell into a stunned, breathless silence. Marcus looked down at me, his voice steady and low. "Only this works. Understand?" I stared up at him, completely captivated by the intensity in his dark eyes. The chaotic noise of the room faded into nothing. All I could hear was the frantic, thumping beat of my own heart. So when we met again in the elevator bank weeks later, and he asked me in that cool, detached voice, "Your name is Kelly, right? Are you open to a strictly physical arrangement?" I didn't hesitate. My life had been a bleak, colorless struggle up to that point. I had never encountered anyone so brilliant, powerful, and utterly mesmerizing. In that moment, my body answered for me. I nodded. From that day on, every encounter ended with a generous transfer to my account, alongside an endless stream of designer bags and jewelry. The air outside the corporate headquarters was biting, a harsh Chicago wind that seemed to cut straight through my wool coat. I walked aimlessly for 3 blocks. Before my legs finally gave out, forcing me to sit on a concrete planter outside. A quiet library. My phone buzzed incessantly in my pocket. It was the executive director, probably wondering why I had vanished after my encounter with Serafina. Or perhaps it was a text from one of my colleagues, asking when the celebratory dinner was happening. I pulled the phone out. My hands were shaking so violently I almost dropped it onto the slush-covered pavement. I swiped past the notifications and opened my banking app. There it was. The savings account I had meticulously built up over the last 5 years. It was a respectable sum, but a significant portion of it had come from the allowance Marcus had deposited monthly during our arrangement, alongside the bonuses from a job I now knew I had never earned on my own merit. Every dollar felt like a brand, a mark of my compliance and my utter naivety. I stood up, the cold shock of reality clearing the remaining cobwebs of grief from my mind. I walked to the nearest bank branch. "I'd like to cashier's check the entirety of this balance," I told the teller. My voice surprisingly steady. "Leave only $500 in the account." 20 minutes later, I walked out with a paper slip worth nearly $200,000. I returned to my hotel room. The scent of Marcus's expensive cologne still lingered on the sheets, a faint mix of cedarwood and amber that made my stomach pitch. I didn't let myself look at the bed. Instead, I pulled my suitcase onto the luggage rack and began packing. I took off the diamond stud earrings he had bought me for my last birthday. I slid off the delicate platinum bracelet that had rarely left my wrist. I gathered the 3 designer handbags I had brought for this trip. Finally, I pulled out the joint credit card, the one I had foolishly used the day before in a desperate bid for his attention. I placed everything on the glass desk in the corner of the room, the jewelry, the card, and the cashier's check containing every cent he had ever given me. Next to them, I laid a brief, handwritten note on the hotel stationery. "Marcus, here is everything that belongs to you. The jewelry, the card, and the money you deposited over the years. I have also calculated the approximate value of the designer gifts I couldn't bring with me. The amount in the check covers them. Thank you for the lesson in fairness. Kelly. I didn't call an Uber. I walked down to the lobby, checked out, and left the keycard with the receptionist, along with a sealed envelope containing the items, addressed to Marcus Mercer. Please ensure this is delivered to the guest in room 812 when he returns, I said. Of course, Ms. Vance, the receptionist smiled, completely unaware that she was witnessing the final act of a 5-year-long self-delusion. I walked out into the gray afternoon, hailed a yellow cab, and headed toward the broadcasting station one last time. The resignation letter was short. I didn't demand an exit interview, nor did I write a long-winded paragraph about my contributions. I simply stated that I was resigning from my position as producer of late-night finance, effective immediately. When I handed it to the executive director, his face flushed with a mixture of annoyance and embarrassment. Kelly, don't be dramatic, he said, tossing the paper onto his desk. Serafina is new to this. She needs your expertise. We're offering to keep your salary exactly the same. You'll just be working behind the scenes. It's a comfortable gig. A comfortable gig where I do all the work and she takes all the credit? I asked quietly. That's how the industry works. You of all people should know that corporate backing is everything. He sighed, leaning back. Look, Marcus Mercer's group is our biggest advertiser now. If you walk out, it makes us look bad. It makes him look bad. Just play nice for 6 months. I don't work for Marcus Mercer anymore, I said. And I don't work for you. I turned and walked out of his office before he could reply. As I packed my desk into a single cardboard box, the news of my sudden departure spread through the floor. A few of my junior assistants looked at me with genuine sorrow, while others kept their distance, already sensing the shift in political power. Serafina was standing near the break room, chatting with the lead anchor. She caught my eye and offered a sweet, pitying wave. I didn't return it. I carried my box to the elevator, the heavy glass doors of the station closing behind me for the last time. The next few weeks were a descent into a different kind of reality. I moved out of the corporate leased apartment Marcus had arranged for me in Chicago. I couldn't afford to stay in the city center anymore. Instead, I rented a cramped, drafty studio in a brick walk-up in Pilsen, where the radiators clanked through the night and the train rattled the window panes every 20 minutes. Without Marcus's money and without my high-paying network salary, my budget was razor thin. My remaining $500, supplemented by a small personal savings account I had kept strictly separate from anything associated with him, had to cover my rent, deposit, and groceries. I spent my days sitting at a thrift store wooden table, my laptop open, sending out resumes to every independent media outlet, digital publisher, and podcast network in the country. But the industry was smaller than I thought. We love your work, Kelly, one hiring manager told me over a phone interview. But we received some feedback from your former network. They mentioned there were compliance issues. And honestly, we do a lot of business with Mercer Holdings. We can't risk offending them. I closed my laptop, the silence of my tiny apartment suddenly suffocating. Marcus hadn't just taken away my show. He had built a wall around me, ensuring that if I didn't play by his rules, I wouldn't play at all. In the penthouse suite of the Mercer Group headquarters, the atmosphere was tense. Marcus sat at his desk, his fingers tapping a slow, rhythmic beat against the polished mahogany. On the corner of the table sat the sealed hotel envelope. He had opened it 3 days ago, expecting to find a tearful plea or perhaps a demand for more money. Instead, he had found the cashier's check, the platinum bracelet, the diamond studs, and the short, dry note. Sir, the wedding planner needs your approval on the seating arrangements for the grand ballroom, his secretary, Evelyn, said gently, standing near the door. Leave it on the table, Marcus said, his voice flat. Also, Mr. Vance's former network reached out. They wanted to confirm if the sponsorship details for the third quarter are still finalized, given her departure. Marcus's hand paused. Her departure? Yes, sir. Kelly Vance resigned 2 weeks ago. Apparently, she declined the transition role. Marcus's jaw tightened. Where is she? Our security team checked the corporate housing. She cleared out her belongings the same day she resigned. She didn't use the relocation service we provided. Evelyn hesitated. And, she hasn't used any of the auxiliary accounts. The credit card we issued has been flagged as deactivated by her request. Marcus stood up, walking to the floor-to-ceiling window overlooking the foggy Chicago skyline. He had expected her to break. When she had walked away 3 months ago, he had assumed it was another one of her emotional outbursts. Kelly was passionate, stubborn, and fiercely independent to a fault, which was precisely why he had felt the need to keep her on a short leash. He had bought her career because he wanted her to understand that her entire world existed because he allowed it to. But this complete severance was different. She had stripped herself of everything he had given her, leaving herself completely vulnerable, just to prove a point. Find out where she is living, Marcus said, not turning around. And find out what she's doing for money. Yes, Mr. Mercer. After Evelyn left, Marcus pulled the cashier's check from the envelope. The paper was slightly creased. $200,000. To him, it was pocket change. To her, it was 5 years of security, of comfort, of the life he had carefully constructed for her. He crumbled the check in his fist, his knuckles turning white. Stubborn girl, he muttered, his eyes dark with an anger he couldn't quite define. By the second month of my unemployment, my pantry consisted of bulk rice, canned beans, and cheap tea. I had stopped looking at the mainstream networks. Instead, I focused my attention on the growing landscape of independent digital media. I realized that while the big networks had the money, they lacked the trust of the younger, more skeptical public. I reached out to Clara, an old colleague from my early college days who ran a struggling, independent financial news site called the Daily Ledger. It was a 2-person operation operating out of a shared workspace in an old warehouse. We can't pay you what you're worth, Kelly, Clara said, handing me a chipped mug of lukewarm coffee. Honestly, we can barely pay our hosting fees. But we have total creative control. No board of directors, no corporate sponsors pulling the strings. I don't want a high salary, Clara, I said, looking around the small, cluttered room. I just want to write. I want to report on stories that actually matter, without having to ask permission from some billionaire in a custom suit. Clara looked at me, searching my face. You look different. Tired, but sharper. I am, I said. Let me work. My first piece for the Daily Ledger was a deep dive investigation into the predatory lending practices of mid-sized financial firms targeting small businesses in the Midwest. I didn't use the flashy graphics or the sensationalist tone of late-night finance. I let the data speak. I interviewed real business owners who had been ruined by these loans. I worked 18 hours a day, drafty windows and all. When my fingers got too cold to type, I wrapped myself in a cheap fleece blanket and kept going. The article went live on a Tuesday morning. By Tuesday night, it had been shared thousands of times on social media. By Thursday, a major national outlet had picked up the story, citing the Daily Ledger and Kelly Vance as the lead investigative journalist. For the first time in 5 years, the credit belonged to me. No sponsorships, no hidden donations. Just my name, my research, and my words. I sat at my desk, watching the view count rise, and felt a quiet, profound sense of peace. My phone rang. It was an unknown number. I hesitated before answering. Kelly Vance. You're making quite a noise in a very small pond, Kelly. The cold, smooth baritone made my heart skip a beat. Mr. Mercer, I said, keeping my voice as level as possible. I'm working. If this isn't business related, I'm going to hang up. You're living in a drafty apartment in Pilsen, Marcus said, his voice entirely devoid of emotion. You're eating processed food and writing for a blog that can barely afford to keep its domain active. Is this the dignity you wanted so badly? My grip on the phone tightened. How I live is none of your business. I can buy that website by tomorrow morning and shut it down, he said quietly. Or I can fund it, give you a real budget, and move you into a decent place. You don't have to live like a martyr, Kelly. It doesn't suit you. You still don't get it, do you? I let out a soft, dry laugh. You think everything has a price tag. You think because you can buy the building, you can buy the person inside it. I'd rather freeze in this apartment than spend another second in your golden cage. Kelly. Goodbye, Mr. Mercer. I hung up and immediately blocked the number. My hands were trembling, but for the first time, it wasn't out of fear or longing. It was pure, unadulterated resolve. 6 months later, the Daily Ledger had transitioned from a struggling blog to a highly respected independent media outlet, largely due to our investigative series on corporate lobbying. We had successfully launched a weekly video podcast, which I hosted from our newly renovated, though still modest, studio. Meanwhile, the mainstream networks were struggling. I occasionally saw clips of late-night finance online. Serafina was beautiful on camera, but her delivery was stiff, and her lack of financial background was painfully obvious. The show's ratings had plummeted by 40%, despite the $12 million sponsorship package Marcus had injected into it. The audience could sense the lack of substance. One afternoon, Clara walked into the studio, holding an embossed gold invitation. "We got invited to the Midwest Economic Summit," she said, her eyes wide with excitement. "It's the biggest financial event of the year. Usually, they only invite the legacy networks. But because of our coverage on the supply chain crisis, they've given us 2 press passes." My heart did a slow, heavy thud. The Midwest Economic Summit was chaired by the Mercer Group. Marcus would definitely be there. "We don't have to go if it's too much," Clara said gently, knowing a fraction of the history between Marcus and me. "We're going," I said, looking her in the eye. "We earned those passes. We aren't hiding anymore." The day of the summit was exceptionally cold. I wore a simple, tailored black suit I had bought from a consignment shop, not the designer labels I used to wear, but it fit perfectly and made me feel sharp, professional, and entirely myself. The Grand Hall of the Drake Hotel was packed with journalists, CEOs, and political figures. As Clara and I set up our mobile recording equipment in the press corner, a stir went through the crowd. Marcus had entered the hall. He looked as striking as ever in a dark navy 3-piece suit, his presence commanding the attention of everyone in the room. Walking beside him, her arm looped elegant through his, was Serafina. She wore a stunning white designer dress, looking every bit the high society fiancée. Marcus's gaze swept over the crowd, cool and indifferent, until it landed on our corner. His eyes locked onto me. I didn't look away. I didn't flush, and I didn't hide behind my camera. I gave him a polite, professional nod, the kind you give to a distant acquaintance, and turned back to adjust our microphone levels. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Marcus's jaw tighten. He stopped mid-sentence. While speaking to a local senator, his eyes lingering on me for several long seconds before Serafina gently tugged his arm, drawing his attention back. "He's still looking at you," Clara whispered, leaning in. "Let him look," I said. "We have a job to do." During the afternoon press conference, the main panel consisted of several prominent CEOs, with Marcus sitting at the center as the keynote sponsor. The floor was open for questions. The Legacy Network journalists asked safe, pre-approved questions about market growth and projected revenues. I raised my hand. The moderator hesitated, but seeing the press badge of the Daily Ledger, which had recently won an independent journalism award, he called on me. "Kelly Vance, the Daily Ledger," I said, my voice echoing clearly through the microphone. I looked directly at Marcus. "Mr. Mercer, your firm recently backed the new infrastructure bill, claiming it would create thousands of local jobs. However, public records show that 40% of the subcontractors hired for the Chicago project are offshore entities owned by shell corporations under the Mercer Group umbrella. How do you reconcile your public statements about supporting local labor with the reality of your corporate restructuring?" A collective murmur went through the room. The other journalists turned to look at me, some in shock, others in quiet admiration. Serafina, who was sitting in the front VIP row, turned and glared at me, her face pale with anger. Marcus, however, didn't look angry. He leaned forward, resting his forearms on the table, his dark eyes fixed on me with an intensity that could have melted steel. "The restructuring," Marcus said, his voice smooth and steady through his mic, "was necessary to ensure compliance with international supply standards. However, Ms. Vance's point about local labor is well taken. We are currently reviewing those subcontracts to ensure local firms are prioritized." He held my gaze. "An astute observation, Ms. Vance. I'd expect nothing less from you." Thank you, Mr. Mercer, I said, sitting back down. We look forward to seeing those revised contracts. When the panel concluded, the room broke into chatter. Clara grabbed my arm, her face flushed with excitement. Kelly, that was incredible. You just put the city's most powerful billionaire on the defensive. Before I could reply, a shadow fell over our table. Kelly. I turned. Marcus was standing there, having bypassed the crowd of reporters, trying to get his attention. Mr. Mercer, I said, my tone perfectly professional. Do you have an official statement you'd like to release regarding the subcontracts? I want to talk to you. Private, he said, his voice low and dangerous. I'm currently on duty, Mr. Mercer. If you want to schedule an interview, you can contact our editor. It's not about the interview, he said, taking a step closer, his scent, the cedarwood and amber, filling my senses, bringing back a rush of memories I had worked so hard to bury. 5 minutes, Kelly. Don't make me make a scene in front of your peers. I looked at Clara, who gave me a supportive nod, indicating she would watch the equipment. 5 minutes, I said. We walked into a quiet, dimly lit corridor behind the main ballroom. The muffled sounds of the summit faded behind us. The moment the door closed, Marcus turned to me, his composure cracking for the first time. What are you doing, Kelly? He demanded, his voice a low hiss. You're living like a vagrant, writing for some third-rate blog, just to prove a point. You ruined your career at the network. I didn't ruin my career, Marcus. I ended my association with a man who thought he could buy my self-worth, I replied, looking him dead in the eye. And the Daily Ledger is not a third-rate blog. We just broke a story that you had to publicly address in front of the entire financial press. Marcus took another step forward, cornering me against the wood-paneled wall. The physical proximity was overwhelming, my body remembering the feel of his hands, the heat of his skin. But my mind was entirely cold. I did what I did to protect you, he said, his voice dropping to a rough whisper. You wanted that show so badly. You were killing yourself for it. I bought it so you wouldn't have to beg those parasites for scraps. No, I said, a tear escaping my eye, though my voice remained firm. You bought it so I would always know that without you, I was nothing. You wanted me completely dependent on you, so that even when you got married to someone else, I'd still be waiting in your guest bedroom, grateful for whatever crumbs of attention you decided to throw my way. Marcus's expression shifted, a rare flash of pain crossing his handsome features. He reached out, his thumb gently catching the tear on my cheek. Kelly, the marriage to Serafina is a business merger. It has nothing to do with how I feel about you. That's the difference between us, Marcus, I said, gently but firmly pushing his hand away. To you, everything is a transaction. Your business, your career, even your marriage. But my life isn't a transaction anymore. I can call it off, he whispered suddenly, the words hanging in the quiet air. Like a bomb. I froze, looking at him. I can call off the wedding, Marcus repeated, his dark eyes searching mine with a desperation I had never seen in him before. Come back to me. We'll do it on your terms. No credit cards, no sponsorships. Just us. For a split second, that foolish, fragile spark of joy from months ago flared up in my chest. But as I looked into his eyes, I realized the truth. He didn't want me because he loved me. He wanted me because he couldn't control me anymore. The moment I agreed, the moment I walked back into his world, the power dynamic would shift right back, and I would once again become a bird in his gilded cage. I smiled, a genuine, sad, but incredibly peaceful smile. No, Marcus, I said gently. You can't call it off. Because even if you did, I wouldn't come back. I like who I am now. And she isn't for sale. I stepped around him, my hand reaching for the doorknob. Goodbye, Marcus. He didn't try to stop me. He stood there, silhouetted against the dim light of the corridor, looking remarkably small for a man who owned half the city. The summit ended, and the Daily Ledger's traffic soared to an all-time high. 2 months later, the news broke that the merger between Mercer Holdings and Serafina's family conglomerate had been delayed indefinitely, amid strategic differences. I didn't follow the gossip columns anymore. I was too busy preparing for our expansion. We were moving to a larger office, and we had just hired 2 new investigative journalists. One evening, after the office had cleared out, I stood by the window of our new workspace, looking out at the city lights. My phone buzzed on the desk. It was a text from an unsaved number, but I recognized the tone instantly. The Mercer Group has officially restructured its local subcontracts. Over 60% of the work has been reallocated to independent Chicago firms. You were right. I stared at the screen for a long moment. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. I locked my phone, slipped it into my bag, and turned off the office lights. As I walked out into the cool night air, the wind didn't feel cold anymore. It felt like freedom.